So, as you all know very well, the IMF team has visited Dhaka April 6th since today, the 17th, to discuss economic and financial policies in the context of the combined third and fourth review. Under the IMF program, Bangladesh is seeing very good progress and signs of recovery and macro stability since the uprising last summer. And the interim government, led by the chief advisor, the financial advisor, and the governor, should be praised for this progress. However, the economy also continues to face challenges and significant external financial needs. The recent external shock and evolving developments are compounding these challenges and injecting significant uncertainty regarding the outlook. Against this background, the discussions focused on preserving macroeconomic stability and bolstering the country's resilience to external shocks. So Bangladesh GDP growth fell to 3.3% year-on-year in the first half of FY25, down from 5.1% in the same period in FY24, reflecting economic disruptions caused by the popular uprising, a tighter policy mix, and heightened uncertainty that weighed on the investment. After peaking at a decade high of 11.7% in July 2024, headline inflation eased at 9.4% in March 2025, but remains well above Bangladesh Bank's target range of 5 to 6%. To address the mounting external financing gaps and ensure a continued decline in inflation, near-term policy tightening remains essential. Fiscal consolidation should prioritize the swift implementation of tax policy to remove extensive tax preferential treatments and simplify the tax system. Carefully calibrating the monetary stance to avoid its premature softening will help anchor inflation expectations, while greater exchange rate flexibility will support price competitiveness, rebuild foreign exchange rate reserve buffers, and strengthen the economy's resilience against external shocks. A comprehensive strategy to boost revenue and reform expenditures is crucial for supporting increased social spending and infrastructure investment. Bangladesh's persistently low tax-to-GDP ratio underscores the pressing need for tax reforms aimed at building a more equitable, transparent, and streamlined system, one that ensures sustainable revenue growth, reduces widespread tax exemptions, improves compliance, and distinctly separates tax policy from administration. Thorough and well-sequenced financial sector reforms are essential for maintaining stability. Legal reforms should align with international standards, and the authorities must move quickly to implement new frameworks that enable orderly bank restructuring while protecting small depositors. Effective asset quality reviews, AQRs, strengthened risk-based supervision, and improved governance and transparency will be critical to restoring confidence and supporting the sector's health. Simultaneously, institutional reforms to enhance Bangladesh Bank's independence and governance will be critical for maintaining long-term macroeconomic financial stability and for the successful implementation of financial sector reforms. Sustaining the pace of structural reforms is crucial for tackling the country's economic challenges. Improving governance and increasing transparency will play a vital role in creating a more favorable investment environment, boosting foreign direct investment, and expanding export sectors beyond ready-made garments. Progress in anti-money laundering risk assessments and enhancements in data quality are equally important. Enhancing resilience to climate change is key for mitigating macroeconomic and fiscal risks. Improving institutional capacity and ensuring more efficient use of resources will support progress toward climate objectives. the government should prioritize climate-responsive fiscal reforms and direct investments towards sustainable, resilient infrastructure. In addition, effectively managing climate-related risks will help safeguard financial sector stability. Discussions are continuing with the objective of reaching a staff-level agreement in the near term, including during our April 2025 IMF World Bank spring meetings in Washington to pave the way for the completion of the combined third and fourth review. We reaffirm our commitment to support Bangladesh and its people at this challenging period. And with that, let's open the floor for questions. We have been having excellent discussions. A lot of progress has been made on three key areas. Two priority areas. One on revenue mobilization. Second on flexibility, which will come of the exchange rate. And a third area, which is not a strict priority of this review, but a priority for the country and for the reviews to come, which is banking sector. So there is, in addition to the two key priority issues, which continue to be discussed on revenues and the exchange rate, is the open question of the macro framework, which has a lot of uncertainties because of the recent shocks with the tariffs. So in other words, we cannot conclude with a baseline framework at this point. We will continue the discussions about the framework for Bangladesh, for the region, for the world, as we go to Washington and as we expect the World Economic Outlook announcements in, I forget when.
April 22nd at 9 a.m. DC time.
Yes, and incorporate this in our assessment for FY25, but more importantly for FY26. So I can assure everybody that the discussions are going on track. It's just that the issues that we are discussing are very difficult. Revenue mobilization, we had these discussions in the past, flexibility of the exchange rate, and the discussions now is that there will be continued engagement until, with the recognition that we reach a staff-level agreement in the near future.
Let's take the question.
We have been discussing with the authorities for a number of reviews now, right? Our approach, the reform we recommend, is not full flexibility. It's an intermediate regime that allows for full flexibility in the future, and maybe in the medium term, not even in the short term. It allows for the ability of the country to sustain some big shocks because of the thin financial markets. We don't want to, put those financial markets into a big risk. But in the future, it allows for the flexibility, full flex as we call it, and that's what we have been discussing with the authorities. The authorities have some concerns about the timing, and timing issues are what we have been discussing, but also some issues about maybe volatility in the market after you implement that reform. And this is the kind of difficult discussions that we have, but we are in very good path, and we are hoping that we will be reaching a staff-level agreement in the near future. On the NPL issues, let me invite
Ivo is here.
Ivo, yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your question to the health part of the economy. So to deal with NPLs, the authorities are making efforts to improve recovery and enforcement of NPLs. In that context, the new legal framework to improve corporate insolvency framework and also to identify and remove impediments to recovery NPLs are the two steps in the right direction.
The question was about the flexibility of the exchange rate and the market conditions right now. We also see that the illegal exchange rate with the official exchange rate difference is very small, and we praise the authorities for this. There is, I think, an agreement between us and the governor, Bangladesh Bank, on flexibility. There is no doubt that we are all want to move in the same direction. We see more flexibility of the exchange rate regime in Bangladesh. Now, one of the questions was, is it the right time to do this now? From the perspective for where we stand as IMF and looking at the reform and the history of it, right? We have been having discussions about this crawling peg for at least 1 or 2 years now. This is the right time actually to go for this flexibility. Again, this is not full flex. This is a crawling peg, which allows for some guidance around the band, but also allows for full flexibility in the future. That's one point. The second point is that while we see that reserves are stabilized, and again, we give a lot of praises to the authorities for that, because if you remember, for a number of years, 2 years, the reserves have been showing a steady declining trend, worrisome, now are at least stable, but we haven't seen an accumulation of these reserves. We expect with more flexibility, you will have this accumulation in the near term. Then on the policy rate, we leave, of course, the policy rate as a decision completely to the governor. We completely endorse the stance, which is tightening, meaning that we want to make sure that inflation comes down on time. So far, it's been very persistent, stubborn, we would say, and compared to other regions. So we applaud the governor for having that stance. Now the question in the future, as we expect inflation easing, maybe in the next year, by the end of the next year, then the governor will be thinking about what to do with this policy rate. But at this point, the policy rate will remain at that level, 10%, until we see clear signs of inflation being moderated. Jen, do you want to respond to this?
So to respond to you is that the team goes back to DC this weekend. The authorities come to DC starting Monday. I think Sunday night they'll be there. The discussions continue in DC, and if all goes well, then we are expecting before the end of the fiscal year, we will do a disbursement. So by end June, we will try and do the disbursement. That is our current baseline. Thank you.
With the authorities on targets. And for example, just to give you a sense of how we do our work, in assessing the needs of the country, we have something called the financing gap. And based on this financing gap, we make an assessment of these targets. And we are in continuous discussions, every review, where these targets are. For example, on the NIR target, on the reserves target, we are very mindful that sometimes the authorities, even though they do the best they can, they cannot reach some of our targets that we place. However, we always want to push, and the governor knows this very well. We want to see accumulation of the reserves, but we continue to be mindful of what is reality and what the authorities can achieve. I don't know, Sokyun, if you wanted to come in on the
the external environment. So given this, we set NIR and the fiscal revenue target. So given the heightened uncertainty, as Chris mentioned, actually the financing gap, and then even though the inflation is now start to decline, still elevated levels, and near term, the policy, monetary and fiscal policy tightening is needed. Given this background, we set the NIR, net international reserve, and the revenue target. So this is our objective. Thank you.
So this time also Bangladesh to failed or not fulfill the tax GDP ratio. So in this time, or do you have any suggestion make reconnection the terms and about the bank reform? So we know you talk about discuss about going from our country another country. So do you have any suggestion to recover this money assets?
Our assessment that for the future, not only for now, which is very challenging, but for the future, and I have in mind here graduation of Bangladesh from the LDC status to becoming a low-end emerging market. I think that ambition needs to come along with higher levels of higher ratios, revenues to GDP. So at this point, as you mentioned, the revenues to GDP has been either stable or even sometimes declining, and we want to about 7 to 8%, and that is extremely low. So even if we compare it with other countries at the same level, Bangladesh is very, very low. Just to give you a statistic, over the last 10 years, most of the countries, most developing economies are at the level of 10 to 15%. With Bangladesh at 8%, we see a lot of value for making this progress. Now on the specifics. The specifics is that we try to create momentum. So we try to change the minds of people, the community, that this revenue to GDP ratio has to be a larger number. And we are trying to find different ways of doing it. Last time, we tried by the measures you mentioned, and I think the measures have been quite successful, even though we had to make some adjustments for some sensitive issues, and we continue to do that. Now we continue that momentum, we believe, with some other measures, and I'll ask my colleague here, the expert on fiscal, to come in, both from VAT but also income tax measures now, to start looking at a ratio that increases. With that, let me turn it to Seokhyun, who can provide some more details.
Yeah, basically, our immediate focus is that to remove the extensive tax exemptions. The Bangladesh, the tax exemptions relative to the other country is quite significant. So therefore, as the Chris indicated, in this regard, also the NBR agreed to this need. So therefore, the main focus is that particularly some of the sunset clause, which means they provide some the exemptions until a certain time. So far, the NBR continue to renew this SRO or the extension. Now the NBR, in principle, agreed to allow all sunset clause to lapse as planned, which means that gradually the tax exemptions will be lowered. This is more transparent, more fairer in the tax system. Also, countries the statutory weight rate is 15%. However, many items is not applicable to 15%. So therefore, MBR now is actually increasing this truncated weight rate to the 15%. Also, many items on the income tax side is actually 0% interest rate. Now, NBR is intends to increase the minimum tax rate from 0 to certain rate. So therefore, this will contribute to removing the tax exemptions. In the medium term, actually MBR is going to publish medium and longer term revenue strategy. Actually, this is a guiding principle and the more sustainable revenue mobilization over the medium term. Thank you.
And for the question on...
Is a prerequisite for healthy growth rate. Now, the new regulation that you mentioned on asset classification and provisioning is a cornerstone of regulation that is in line with international best practice. And we would commend the authorities to actually implement this rule that revealed the legacy problem of MPLs. MPLs did not appear because of that classification, they were just revealed as a legacy problem. Now, having said that, the authorities have to strike the right balance between ensuring that the objectives of the policies are met while minimizing unintended consequences. On the stolen assets, at this point, we would just say that the authorities are making good steps in the right direction on coordinating domestic and global efforts to freeze, confiscate, and recover stolen assets.